Edwin, tell us what happened on June 29, 1983.
Okay, on June 29, 1983, I was arrested along with my co-defendants Alejandrina Torres, Alberto Rodriguez, and Jose Luis Rodriguez. We were accused, we were charged with seditious conspiracy, conspiring to overthrow the United States government by alleged force and violence. And we represent a third generation of Puerto Ricans that have been charged with sedition going back to 1937 with Abisu Campos, 1950 and 54 with the Nationalists, 1980, 81, other members accused of being part of the FALN, and in my case, 1983. We invoked our right as prisoners of war to be tried by an international tribunal. The court rejected our claim, and we were charged in a domestic court, federal court in the United States, and sentenced to 35 years in prison.
When you were sentenced, when sentence was pronounced on you?
The sentence was actually in October of 1985, after approximately almost 2 years of court proceedings. We were sentenced in 35 years in October 1985, and I was sent with Alberto to the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute and subsequently to the U.S. Penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania.
What was your defense really? Your defense.
So we took the position that we were uh, prisoners of war because the United States, we didn't recognize the authority of the United States government over Puerto Rico. And after our arrest, Don Juan Antonio Cortés put out a position paper that Puerto Ricans could not be accused of sedition because we are not seditious. We are fighting for the independence of our country. We're not conspiring to overthrow the United States government. We're conspiring because the United States authority in Puerto Rico is illegal, immoral, and inhumane for the
Okay.
last 127 years.
Okay. Had you been arrested before? Before then?
Never.
So what were you doing? What were you doing at this point? What was your profession?
Actually, I was working for unemployment compensation in Chicago, in the city of Chicago. So I was interviewing clients who were fired or left their job and reviewing whether or not they were eligible for unemployment compensation.
What organization did you belong to?
Well, they accused us of being part of the Armed Forces for National Liberation, Fuerzas Armadas de Liberación Nacional, which was a clandestine Puerto Rican organization.
You thought you had the right to belong to any organization you wanted. Okay.
Well, Puerto Rico has a long history of armed resistance against U.S. occupation, which began on July 25th, 1898. The United States bombarded Puerto Rico and entered and militarily invaded through Guanica. And there's been armed resistance since that time to the imposition of colonialism in Puerto Rico. So in 1898, the Puerto Ricans resisted with machetes in their hands. And Abisu Campos really, he was accused of sedition just for the speeches that he made. They really never accused him of carrying out no violent actions or armed actions. And in 1950 and 54, in 1950, two nationalists attacked the Blair House, the residence of President Truman. And in 1954, four Puerto Ricans attacked the United States Congress, March 1st, 1954. And they were accused
March
of
1st. March 1st, eh?
March 1st, 1954, yeah.
Okay. How many of them attacked the U.S. Congress?
Four of them. They ended up serving 25 to 29 years. They were their sentences were commuted by Jimmy Carter September 9th, 1979, and subsequently our sentences were commuted 20 years later by Bill Clinton on September 9th, 1999.
That is your group. That was your group,
Yes.
eh? The Clinton.
Yeah, 1999, 12 of us were sentences were commuted. The sentences that were not commuted were Oscar Lopez, who was released subsequently 37 years later by President Obama on January 17th, 2017. And Carlos Alberto had gotten out previously, like in July of 2016, I think it was. They were not commuted when we were commuted in 1999.
So what is the situation now? What's the situation now?
Well, actually, and this past week there was hearings in the United Nations, the annual hearings on Puerto Rico's colonial status. The United Nations has passed like 42 resolutions in recognition of Puerto Rico's right to self-determination and independence. And those hearings were held in past weekend, and Esteli read your message to the body, which was a committee of 24. They've been having hearings since 1972 on Puerto Rico in the United Nations. But at this present time right now, finally, the political status of Puerto Rico today does not function because we're neither a state nor are we associated. So President Obama, before he left, which really highlights the colonial nature of Puerto Rico, President Obama appointed a 7-member fiscal board, and that fiscal board controls all of Puerto Rico's financial situation and alleges that we owe the United States government $72 billion. And those $72 billion, this junta fiscal board is supposed to charge the Puerto Rican government, and we're supposed to pay the $72 billion, but we will never be able to pay that debt because right now all we're doing is paying interest on that debt. So it's already been 7 years. So the Puerto Rican government really does not function in Puerto Rico. The judiciary, the executive, and the legislature all respond to the 7-member junta, all of them who are multimillionaires trying to recover $72 billion that never be able to recover. But that was their way of continuing to perpetuate colonialism in Puerto Rico. It's almost like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank imposition on Nigeria and other African countries to control their economies and government.
Let's talk about your time in prison. What was your experience like?
So in prison, we were very well respected with the prison population. In Lewisburg Penitentiary, actually, I was involved with translating for all the Hispanics from Latin America because a lot of them didn't speak English. So I served as an interpreter between what their rights and the administration control over them. Like a lot of them were in a penitentiary, but then weren't supposed to be in a penitentiary. They were supposed to be like in a medium security, and I would help them get sent back to the minimum security. We participated in political and social events. Actually, we brought films on Latin American history. Back then, there was very little films on the Puerto Rican struggle. There was more films on Latin America, so we were able to bring these films from New York and Chicago into the penitentiary so that the Latin American population could see these movies. We organized food that we cooked on our own. We had a program called Bon Appetit, which was a special meal of the month, and the prison population would always look forward to a special meal that the prisoners themselves would cook a little bit better than the ordinary prison food.
You learned a lot of things while you were in prison for how many years were you in prison?
16 and a half.
Yeah, you learned a lot of things. You seem to have gone from one profession to another.
Oh yeah, I learned heating, air conditioning, plumbing, and electrical work, HVAC, and today I'm able to use those skills actually that I learned, because we were like we were close to like 5 years in that program, me and Alberto, and we helped a lot of prisoners also in that program to learn the HVAC, because after we went into the classroom, the class is like for 3 years. And after we finished, we were able to stay because the guys that were in charge of the program had left prison. So they gave us their jobs so that we can help the other prisoners that were coming into the program. So the program was unique in that it was not only theoretical, that it was actually hands-on, that we had a workshop with AC units, and we had heating units, and we had like board displays of plumbing and electrical, and we were able to learn using those methods also.
What was your profession like before you went to prison?
Well, I was actually involved in the community. We were involved in a community organization on the south side of Chicago. It was called Don Pedro Abisu Campos Community Collective. And Abisu Campos, like I said before, was the first Puerto Rican accused of sedition who attended Harvard University in the 1920s. And we formed a collective on his name, and we developed political social programs on the south side of Chicago. Like in the summer, when the children get out of school, I was responsible for finding jobs. So we were able to find jobs for like about 60 youth for a few years in our community. And those jobs, we would have them learning different skills also. We were trying to clean up the community. We also had films. We would bring cultural groups on Latin America and Puerto Rico in particular to the community so that we could begin educating the community about the status of Puerto Rico. Back then in the 70s, it was much harder to talk to the Puerto Rican people about colonialism and independence because everybody believed that the Commonwealth status was the best option for Puerto Rico. But now with all the corruption going on in Puerto Rico at present day, people have finally realized that the Commonwealth status does not work. And with the Trump administration right now, you see that they're cutting back on all social programs, and that has affected Puerto Rico drastically, and it has affected our community work on the north side of Chicago, because on the north side of Chicago, We also were part of the Puerto Rican Cultural Center, which presently has a public health initiative that has, we did HIV testing, and we did housing for HIV positive uh, people, and we conducted testing of hepatitis and HIV in the community. And those programs now have lost a lot of uh, grants, federal grants that Trump cut these grants, and our public health initiatives program has really suffered. But we continue doing community work. We just celebrated the Puerto Rican parade on June 14th. That's the 44th Puerto Rican parade. And then in September, we celebrate a festival. It's called Fiesta Boricua, where all the community comes out again, and we have a 3-day celebration, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, during the Labor Day weekend. And we also provide jobs for our community through the Puerto Rican Culture Center. And we have a youth initiative right now trying to combat youth violence. And besides the public health, also we're involved in housing, because our neighborhood is being gentrified, and the housing is no longer affordable for our people. And in the Humboldt Park area, which used to have 1 million Puerto Ricans congregated, and today there might be 200,000. That has all been forced by gentrification and by building high income buildings that our people can't afford.
About how old were you when you were arrested?
I was 28.
So
You're,
what has family life been like for you? Family life,
well,
life,
the hardest
social
part
life.
about yeah, the hardest part about being in prison is not being able to be with your children and 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 your spouse. In my case, when I was arrested, my daughter was 5 years old and my son was 3 years old. And so I was taken away from them. But since my excarceration in 1999, we continued to be together. Um, I am a grandfather to two girls, 9 and 11, Nemadi and Eleni, and who have a father who's from Ethiopia. So they have Puerto Rican and Ethiopian blood. And my grandson, who's 25 years old, just made me a great grandfather with two children that are presently 1 and 3 years old. So the family has been a essential part of our struggle for Puerto Rican independence, that we've been able to survive all this repression and incarceration, but the struggle continues.
Do you have, I mean, in these struggles, even before you were arrested and after, did you try to connect your struggles with other struggles?
Yeah, actually, we were actually I was involved too in the University of Illinois from 1974 to 1979, and we started the Puerto Rican Student Union in 1974. In 1974, we also started the Latin American Studies program. And in 1975, we started the Latin American Recruitment Program, which we call LADES. And LADES had significance because it's the first rebellion against the Spanish on September 23rd, 1868. So a Puerto Rican professor who was assassinated in Chicago, Rafael Cintrón, actually was one of the architects of naming that Latin American Recruitment Program, the LADES program. And after the Lattes program, we created a Latin American Culture Center, which was named after the assassinated professor Rafael Cintrón Ortiz. And during the university, we had strong relations with the Palestinian Student Union, with the Palestinian. I became aware of the Palestinian liberation movement. We were involved with Iranian students who did overthrow the Shah of Iran. And I was involved with a group of students from Eritrea who were fighting for independence against Ethiopia. And we had one of the strongest student movements, I would say, because we had Palestinians, Iranians, uh, Ethiopians, Eritreans, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, and others from Latin America. And so we always had a strong relationship with the Mexican movement, also for the reunification of Mexico. Um,
What do you mean by that? What's the reunification of Mexico?
well, back then, the Mexicans were advocating the reunification with Mexico and the 7 states that the United States took in the Southwest: Colorado, California, New Mexico, Utah. All those 7 states were part of Mexico. And there was a movement in the southwest of Mexico, which was, they used this, a lot of people knew it as the Chicano movement. And they were fighting to reunify the 7 states that the United States took during the Treaty of Tlatelolco. The same thing they did in Puerto Rico with the Treaty of Paris. They took over Puerto Rico. They took over 7 states that belonged to Mexico. So there's always been a movement for the unification of Mexico. And today with the raids that Trump has made a priority to arrest all so-called immigrants here in the United States, that has revitalized the Mexican movement, because now there has been massive protests in Los Angeles, California. All that area has to protest the arrest of the immigration officials coming and arresting Mexicans and deporting them back to Mexico.
So are you, are the Puerto Ricans involved in supporting the Mexicans against deportation?
Yes, we always had strong ties with the Mexicans. We had strong ties with the Palestinians, Iranians, all the Latin. We were actually moved by the liberation struggles in Latin America. As you remember, back in the 70s, all these Latin American countries were fighting for independence, like Nicaragua, El Salvador, Uruguay, Argentina. We were moved specifically by the armed movements in these countries that obtained their freedom.
Okay.
And we also were involved with Africans, because we had ties with the Black Panther Party, and we had ties with the New African Movement that actually was also advocating freedom and independence in the United States and the countries down south.
You
And
said you are part of the Black
also,
Panther and New African movement, eh?
right,
And New
yeah.
African movement.
And the New African Movement was very much involved in the struggles in Angola, South Africa, Mozambique. We were also motivated by those liberation struggles also.
So why were you involved with all these groups? Why you? Is it
Well,
because of solidarity?
we believe that in unity, we have more strength, so that we're able to unite and form big, massive. Back then, it was the Vietnam War in '67 that was one of the popular movements to end the Vietnam War. And today, we're seeing that the United States attacked Iran, and Israel has killed 55,000 Palestinians. And now, more than ever, the unity amongst our people is urgent and necessary for our own survival, because everything that we struggled for in the 70s, the Trump administration has taken back everything that we have fought for in terms of civil and human rights, education, the tax that he's made on education. If we were back in the day, now they're trying to criminalize support for Palestine by saying that it's uh, anti-Semitic, and they've actually incredibly passed laws and have arrested international students and deported some of them also back to their countries, because they don't want international students attending the universities like the University of Harvard and other major universities. And Donald Trump has cut millions of dollars from these universities so that these students can no longer attend the university and obtain an education.
So, what's your analysis of the future of Puerto Rico? What's the future like?
Well, we believe that eventually we're going to be a free and independent nation with the help of the international community. Now, with our attempts to start the end colonialism movement, which we celebrated the first anniversary in Nigeria, and we traveled to Nigeria to become part of this end colonialism movement, which is based on the United Nations resolution to end colonialism by 2030. And we have documented of over 60 countries that are still colonial countries today. And the United Nations only recognizes 17, and out of those 17, Puerto Rico is not one of them, even though they've passed 42 resolutions in support of Puerto Rico's independence and self-determination. So we have a long way to go to end colonialism. And I guess the best example would be Western Sahara, which has been to the World Court, which has been to the General Assembly, and still today continues to be a colony under Morocco. Morocco being one of the last African countries to have a colony. And Morocco is being backed by France, which has a right-wing government similar to the right-wing government's fascist government that we have today in the United States. And in Puerto Rico, there's a lot of popular struggles now because the Americans have been given an option to buy land, and they're buying land along our beaches. We've been able to document the fact that the projects that they have developed in some of the towns on these beaches, for example, Rincon, you walk to the beach in Rincon, and you can see the buildings. Some of the buildings actually are inside the ocean, and now they want to continue building close to the ocean, and we have more than sufficient evidence to suggest that those buildings are not going to survive being built on the coast of Puerto Rico, because the water is always going to take them away, no matter how much cement that they put on them. So actually, they're trying to deny the Puerto Rican people the right to use our own beaches in Puerto Rico, and they've been developing all these projects. It's what they call also gentrification. Well, in our community, they built buildings, and Puerto Rico, they're buying up our land and building tourist projects on our land to attract tourism. So the gentrification is here in the United States and in Puerto Rico. In Aguadilla, my hometown, they're trying to build like 80 new townhouses, which is on top of a cave. And they're putting all this cement on top of the cave. And the cave is a sanctuary for the pelican in Aguadilla, my hometown. La Pargueras is another municipio of Puerto Rico. And in that, they built a whole lot of houses all along fluorescent bays that we used to have, one of the most beautiful fluorescent bays that you could see at night. But due to the building and all the contamination, now it's no longer a fluorescent bay. And now that struggle has really been popularized because nobody has a legal right to build along this like mangroves. And they built all along these mangroves. Over 100 houses have been built, and there's no deed. You can't have no deed, but they built these houses. They say they got permission, they got electricity, they got plumbing, but they're all illegal. And the present governor, Jennifer Gonzalez, her husband's family and her family are owners of that property. And while she was resident commissioner, she knows very well that the federal government has protection over mangroves. And so all this project is being illegal. And now they want to build one in Cabo Rojo. They're trying to build a big project, tourist project, over $200 million they invested to create a tourism project in Cabo Rojo, which is called Estancia. And all these projects, the majority of these projects are in the West Coast where I presently live in Aguadilla.
Sorry, what are in those caves? The caves where they are building those things, environmental areas.
Yeah,
You are building a caves in your town. Eh? Yeah.
the cave is along the
Yeah.
coast of my hometown. The cave is in the coast, and it's a sanctuary for the pelican. They're building on top of this cave with cement, which is they're technically not allowed to do that. But since there's so much corruption going on in Puerto Rico and a lot of money for all these projects, tourism projects, so far they've been able to get away with it, but the people are fighting to get their land back and have these projects ended.
So, what organization do you belong to now?
I'm still part of the Puerto Rican Culture Center, and I'm part of the Puerto Rican Culture Center in Chicago, and I'm part of the Human Rights Committee here in Puerto Rico, which was the committee that fought for the freedom of our excarceration, 1999. For Carlos Alberto in 2016, for Oscar 2017. So I've been involved in the Human Rights Committee in Puerto Rico, and part of the struggle. We've been one of the few movements that's been able to free 3 sets of political prisoners in 1979, 1999, like I said, 2016 and 17. But the largest groups were 79 and 99. 79, the 5 nationalists were released. 1999, 12 of us were released. And then Obama in 2017 freed Oscar after 37 years. And then now I'm trying to dedicate some of my time, prioritize on the end colonialism movement through the IPRI in Puerto Rico and through our comrades in Nigeria.
Was anybody freed in 2016?
Carlos
So it's
Alberto.
just 1979, 99, and 2017.
No, Carlos Alberto was July. I think his was July 2016. When we were offered commutation by Clinton, he did not include Carlos Alberto Torres because they said at that time that Carlos was the leader of the organization. So they refused to give him any commutation. So when Oscar Lopez was actually granted commutation with the condition that he do 15 more years in prison, but since he refused that offer to continue 15 more years in prison, and then all of a sudden Oscar was the lead. They made Oscar the leader.
So let's have your closing thoughts. You know, what do you want the rest of the world to do?
Now we are in a situation that there might be a third world war. There even might be a nuclear war. So all the peoples of the world have to unite and come out and expose the present governments that we have, actually, there's a development of fascism all over the world. And I think that's a dangerous precedent for us, and that we have to fight fascism now. And we have to advocate for the end of the war by Israel in Gaza, the genocide that has been carried out in 2025. That would be almost like unimaginable in the 70s when we were struggling. That this happens now in 2025, and the attack on the nuclear plants in Iran, I think, is a dangerous precedent. And we still don't know what the nuclear fallout of those attacks are going to be on the people of Iran and all peoples across the world. What's going to be the effect? So now more than ever, we have to come together and fight to end colonialism, fight to end unjust wars, and fight to end the genocide in Gaza, and fight for independence of Western Sahara and the other African countries that are still under foreign domination. It says all people have a right to self-determination and independence, and we continue to advocate for that right, and hope that by the year 2030 that we're able to achieve our goals.
Thank you very much, Oscar.
All right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so